So first of all, thank you to everyone for signing up and coming out. Welcome. I'm Sam Meller. I'm the treasurer for Hillel, and I'm the president of the Real Estate Student Association at FIU. And on behalf of Hillel, it's my pleasure to welcome you guys to FIU's Israel Week. So every year we organize this and present. It's a diverse series of events to educate you guys about the community and a little bit about the state of Israel and learn through different aspects. So today's event, we're doing commercial real estate in Israel, and it's co-sponsored by the College of Business, Hollo School of Real Estate, and Real Estate Student Association. And so this event, we're going to feature a presentation by Adi Jemini. He's the CFO of Gazette Globe Group. And also we're going to follow this with a Q&A led by John Warwick. He's the executive director at Hillel, FIU. Throughout today's conversation, members of the audience, you guys are encouraged to post questions in the Q&A box, and the moderator will be able to ask to the speaker. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Adi Jemini. He's been the Chief Financial Officer of Gazit Globe since 2015. Jemini joined Gazit Globe in 2013 after previously serving as Chief of Staff of the company's chairman, Chaim Katzman. He worked closely with senior management teams of all the company's 6 subsidiaries, and he's also been involved in the M&A activities of the group. Before joining Gazit, Jemini served as regional controller of Equity One Incorporated, the company's former U.S. Subsidiary. He was responsible for the entire West Coast and South Florida regions, with direct authority over finance, accounting of over 60 of Equity One's shopping centers, and it had an aggregated value of about $1.7 billion, generating an annual net NOI, net operating income in excess of $100 million. Jemini holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Accounting and Information Systems from Virginia Polytechnic Institute at the State University, and he graduated summa cum laude in 2003. He has a CPA in the US since 2005, and I'll open it up to John.
No, let's just turn it right over to Adi to get started.
Okay. All right. Thank you guys for the introduction. This is very impressive. Before I upload the presentation, to say, seeing over 90 people at Virginia Tech back in 2002, I think at the level we had maybe 20 people on a good day. So this is very encouraging to see how this organization evolved, and obviously with the presence in South Florida. I have, obviously, as mentioned, I'm the CFO and Executive Vice President of Gazette Globe. We'll talk about it, give you a little bit of presentation of who we are, what we do, and of course, you guys feel free to do when we get to the Q&A to ask any questions. Who we are at the Gazette Globe. So we are an Israeli company. We're actually a global real estate company. We are listed in the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. Our market cap is about $1 billion US. We obviously, shopping centers got a little bit of hit during COVID. We do see the beginning of the end now with the vaccination rollout. But nonetheless, we manage about $11 billion US of real estate all over the world, with a size of about 27 million square feet. All in all, we have about 104 properties around the world. Our global presence, if you look at the pie chart, is on to the right. We have about 30% of our portfolio is in Israel, about 18% in Brazil, and in Europe we have about 40% between Germany, Nordics, and Central and Eastern Europe. And of course, here in the U.S. and Canada, we're about 14%. Now, what do we do? I mean, you have an aerial picture over here. This is Rishon LeZion in Tel Aviv, about 18 miles from Tel Aviv. We're the classic shopping center that you probably used to see. I mean, where you get your Publix, LA Fitness, the dental, the Starbucks, and so forth. I will talk a little bit. I'll touch a little bit about the online and the threat to the centers and how we've been able to adjust our tenant mix to address some of these the new generation, which you guys are, the online shoppers. Nonetheless, before I go to that, again, you can see here the investment portfolio, how it kind of spread. We basically, without getting into too much details, we operate under a private platform, which we basically own 100%. We own, control, and manage. And then we also operate through our public vehicles, and that's mainly in Europe. So we are in the U.S. and close to home here in Miami. We have some assets in Brickell. We actually yesterday went to see about a potential residential in Brickell as well. Clearly in South Florida, this is where we started, or we have a lot of link to South Florida. Our chairman, who founded the company, moved to Miami in 1980, and since then we opened an office over here. We are, but to say again, to emphasize, we are an Israeli company. We raised all our capital in Israel. We have about $7 billion, which is $7 billion each, which is equivalent to about $2 billion US dollar bonds in Israel. And what we do, the strategy is basically we're raising capital from the capital markets in Israel, the pension funds, the insurance companies in Israel. Unlike the U.S., everybody has to, it's mandatory to participate in your retirement saving, if it's 401k or a simple IRA. And basically all those funds are going to insurance and pension companies. And what we do, we work with them very closely. We raise funds from Israel, and then we invest in real estate around the world, which clearly will also have a strong presence in Israel. So as you can see, we have about 6 assets in Canada, mainly in Toronto. We have about 11 assets in the U.S. We want to grow the U.S. to be a bit closer to 20% of our balance sheet. Today is about 5 to 6%, with about $500 million of assets. We have a presence in Brazil, about $670 million in Brazil. I'm actually going there this weekend. And then we have in Israel about $1 billion of shopping centers. For those of you who've been to Israel and know Israel, it's anywhere from Tel Aviv to usually most of it is in Tel Aviv metropolitan area. And then we have our subsidiaries in Europe with 26 assets and 41 assets. In term of what we do, our shopping center, as I mentioned, the shopping centers that we operate are your classical bread and butter, what you kind of see along when you ride the scan, or if you ride in Sunny Isles, wherever you see. We are basically grocery anchor shopping centers. We love the model of the daily necessity services, which means we're not in the class of Bal Harbor or even, I would say, Aventura, which is more of a middle upper class. We're basically the daily necessities. Mostly grocery and super and anchored shopping centers. What you'll see, we have the medical offices, the banks, the gyms, and so forth, and of course the restaurant. If you look at the blue pie chart to the right, then what we've done since 2009, we really transformed the tenant mix, and that is something that you have to be very dynamic and sensible to the changes that are happening in the retail world, and that's predominantly the online and Amazon of the world. Clearly, if you looked at this pie chart back in 2004, you would probably see apparel about 70% and probably electronics about 20%. So when we think about the transformation of the shopping centers, then one has to really consider the impact of the online. And what we do today is we diluting the apparel segment out of the shopping center in favor of banks, clinics, gyms. Gyms are becoming the new anchor in the shopping centers, because if you think about it, I know there's Peloton out there, but most people, you cannot really lift weights through the computer, and you cannot really get your teeth cleaned through the computer. So those are the things that are kind of e-commerce resistant. Also, cafes and restaurants. If you look at territories like Brazil, like Israel, I'm sure most of you have been in Israel. The number one meeting or business venue to do is not really in the office. It's not even into Zoom. It's to meet in these coffee shops. There's in every shopping center, there's maybe 5-6 coffee shops. and that's where people like to meet and greet, but actually also meet for doing business. So the pie chart basically is evolving based on the dynamic change in the retail world. On the orange brown pie chart, you can see the exposure or our geography diversification based on our revenues. As anything, I will tell you as the beginning of your career, diversification is good no matter what business line you are and whatever you invest in. So clearly you can see over here how well diverse our portfolio is. And the idea is basically, while there's many countries over here, the DNA of our shopping center is very similar in every country. And while there's various cultural differences and some consumption habits changes, nonetheless, at the end of the day, if you think about it, everybody going to go buy the groceries in the grocery stores. Everybody now today with the health conscious, everybody's going to the gym. So each of our shopping centers, it doesn't matter where it is located around the world, it's pretty much you kind of see the same thing that you would see over here in Miami in our shopping center and so forth. So it's very interesting, and I do a lot of extensive traveling, at least pre-COVID, and it's very interesting to see that at the end of the day, everybody, their consumption habits are fairly the same. So again, to summarize, all in all, we have about 94,000 lease agreements, about 450 million visitors annually in our shopping centers, total about 104 shopping center, and we have about 144 supermarkets. So if you look at the ratio, we actually have about 1.4 grocery store per shopping center. And the reason why is a unique phenomenon in Europe, where in Europe you actually see in each shopping center there's 2 supermarkets, and you know it's actually for coming from the U.S. is a little bit strange, because when you walk into Europe and you look into a mall, there's actually grocery stores in the mall. They don't really have what we call the open strip like shopping center classic like we have in the U.S. They actually, their supermarkets are in the mall, and not they're only in the mall, they usually, the 2 competitors are right in front of each other. So imagine Publix and Winn-Dixie sitting in Aventura Mall right in front of each other. It's very interesting. But nonetheless, this is the makeup of our portfolio. We don't have a single tenant, because of the diversification, we don't really have a single tenant that contribute more than 1.7% of our annual rental, which is, it's again, this is a good testament to our diversification. But as we look into, and sorry, I'm jumping to a few slides. This is kind of investor tailored. As if you look at a few of the examples of our shopping centers, just to give you an idea, we have this assets for those of you that know New York, the 60th and First Avenue in Manhattan. This is asset that was anchored by Bed Bath & Beyond. Clearly, with the impact of the online, Bed Bath & Beyond today doesn't require 90,000 square feet to sell the same amount of revenue, because everything is kind of shifting online. So what we did over there, we were able to reposition this shopping center and basically sign a 20-year lease with Home Depot, where we basically doubled the rent. And it's very interesting because, again, while the online changed a lot of things, at the end of the day, people still going to the brick and mortar to get what they need. And a company like Home Depot actually doing really well, especially right now with the home and residential booming. So Home Depot basically took that lease and we doubled the rent over there, and we basically increased our return by almost 50%. If you look at the middle section, this is an asset in Helsinki, Lippulaiva. This is a mixed-use project that we have, about 500,000 square feet. One of the things that we do in our shopping centers, we like to have public transportation access. Clearly, Miami is a little bit different, but if you think about Israel, if you think about other metropolitan area in New York, if you think about Stockholm and Helsinki and those places, one thing that is very helping our shopping centers that they're all located around the metro stations. And again, one of the things that we do, these projects that we basically enhance value, we basically changed the whole facade, we connected it to the metro station. But at the end of the day, these are all kind of your bread and butter shopping centers. And to the right, in Israel, which we very much like Israel, clearly as an Israeli company, We are building office buildings and residential on top of our shopping centers. It's a project where we are investing about 650 million NIS, which is about $200 million. We're going to build what's happening in Israel. As you know, it's very dense, and unfortunately, there's no more land to build on anymore, given the small size of the country. So we're starting doing more vertical stuff. As you can see, we're going to add like 4 buildings on top of our shopping centers that they're going to be increasing our footfall by almost 20 to 5%. Now, clearly the cities in Israel and the mayor, they love these projects. They obviously give them property tax revenue. They're creating more density, which in return provides them increase in the residential prices. And at the end of the day, they attract more businesses to come to their places and growing their cities. For those of you who haven't traveled to Israel in the last 5 years, I encourage you to go there once COVID and it's safe to go. You can see, if you see the skyline of Israel 20 years ago to what it is today, it's quite remarkable how that small country transformed into a small powerhouse in its own region. So it's very interesting. One thing that I do want to mention in terms of the real estate strategy, and as I mentioned, we operate in a lot of countries around the world. We have presence, as you saw in the pie chart at the beginning of the slide, anywhere from Helsinki, from Toronto, from Stockholm to São Paulo to Tel Aviv, Warsaw, and so forth. But in terms of the real estate and the shopping center, we don't view today, when we analyze a region and we try to consider if we want to penetrate it and invest more capital into it, we really analyze it by the city. Everything that's happening with the internet and everything that's happening with the globalization now, there's clearly a strong shift into moving into the cities. The young generation likes what we call work, live, play. If you will look at Brickell as a case study, or if you look at Tel Aviv, those are the cities when people live, they work, and they have all their leisure over there. I mean, if you go anywhere around Tel Aviv, you can go to the beach in 5 minutes. You can go find the best restaurant in 5 minutes. Your workplace is over there, and that's kind of a trend that is not only unique to Israel, but it's kind of what we're seeing across the world. So when we think about our $11 billion real estate portfolio, at the end of the day, it's only concentrated in 15 metropolitan areas. We don't really, and the point is that we, from an investment perspective, not a personal place of living, we rather buy a shopping center in Tel Aviv than buy it in Kentucky in the US. On the other hand, we much rather buy a shopping center in New York than, let's say, north of Israel in the Galil. And the point is that the demographics, the household income, and the socioeconomic of those characteristics of these cities is such that provide us growth in our shopping centers. So as you can see in the slide over here, about 10 of our assets is only most of all of our assets in Israel is really focused on the metro of Tel Aviv. And everything that we have in the US is anywhere from New York, Boston, Toronto, which is North America, to Philly and Miami. Same thing in Brazil. You know, São Paulo is very unique compared to the rest of Brazil. You can't really paint São Paulo and Brazil in the same paintbrush in terms of when you think about shopping centers and economic production. So that is kind of what we are what we look for when we think about investing in the real estate. Let's talk a little bit about Israel, because at the end it is Israel independence, Israel birthday today, 73 years old. So let's talk a little bit about our shopping centers in Israel. As I mentioned, we have a super urban assets in Israel, about 12 assets in the tune of about $1 billion US. It's about 168 square meters. Again, we as an Israeli company would love to increase our footprint in Israel. Unfortunately, it's such a small country, and the shopping centers that I said, as I prefaced in the previous slide, is such that we only want to concentrate in the Tel Aviv metropolitan area. And unfortunately, there's not enough product for it. So what do we do with that? We basically, to increase our investment, in Israel, and it's hard for us to do it via acquisitions because there's not much you can buy in Israel today. All the land over there is very dense and small. So what we do is we basically invest a lot of funds in our existing shopping centers. So as I mentioned, in Rishon LeZion, in one of our shopping centers, we basically on our 80 dunam land, we're building more office building and residential on top of our shopping centers. In the other west wing, we basically did an excavation and deepening the work to bring Decathlon, and Decathlon is basically, for those of you who don't know, it's a European sports authority type of store. So again, we very much like to increase our presence in Israel. Israel, as you know, is a very strong economy. If you think about only the currency, the Israeli shekel increased almost 8% to the US dollar. If you look at the US dollar a few years ago, you would see that the shekel to the US dollar was almost a 4.5, 4.7. Today, the exchange is 3.3. Israel, while it's a small country, has their GDP engine is supercharged, and the reason for it is the technology. There's more NASDAQ per capita. There's more Israeli companies in NASDAQ than any other country in the world. The reason stems for the fact that the ability to Israel to innovate is not a want. It's really a need because everything is really based there. They're coming from the Defense Department. Israel really has a super technology industry, and it really stems from the military. All the defense and everything is really drives that segment of workforce, which in turn create a lot of productivity for the economy. So that is the growth engine in Israel, and it's their GDP and their level of debt per capita is very, very low. It's almost like if you carve out Israel from the Middle East, and it's no different than any other leading Western countries around the world. And that makes the ground for real estate investment to be very attractive. The only caveat to it is that unfortunately there's not enough land to build on. So that's why you've seen, whether it's shopping centers, whether it's office building, you see a lot of growth in Israel in terms of vertical. And that's what we do. This is two rendering of two our shopping centers. You can see this is no different than the evolution that happened in Israel in the last 5 to 8 years. You can see that our shopping centers that are flat, they're starting to go upwards. And again, these are, we have building rights, and the nice thing that the municipalities in Israel, they're very encouraging of creating more space. You know, if it's vertical, and the thing that the challenge will be more in Israel over there will be the urban landscape over there, the urban planning landscape. But again, if you look at the left side, when we're now thinking about through 2025 to build up those buildings, one of the things that we work with the city is to create 3 more subway stations that will be connected to the shopping center to alleviate some of the traffic congestion that it may create. If we jump to North America, and again, this is something that you guys are pretty much more familiar, and we have 11 assets. This building that you see over here is actually rendering. We have a building that we bought 2 years ago in Brickell. This is actually right across from the Brickell City Center. And we're basically, one of the things that we want to do is increase our footprint in the United States. We obviously, our CEO resides here. I actually reside in Miami too. When I say that, I put it with an asterisk. Pre-COVID, I usually spend only 10 days in Miami, and the rest of the year, I travel between our locations from Brazil. I spend 2 weeks a month in Israel, which I really like. It does create some health problems with all the good food over there, but other than that, it's a great place to come home. But nonetheless, here in Miami, we have an investment, a big investment here that we're going to do in Brickell. And what you see, the transformation in Brickell is very good example to what's happening in the world. You know, everything is becoming dense. A lot of the young professionals live there, they work there, and hopefully the transportation system in Miami will improve, that it can really start to create a true urban city. This is some recent acquisition that we've done also in the U.S. This is in Boston, the marketplace next to the Faneuil Hall. Again, we really like the U.S. market. Clearly, an Israeli company. Israel is the bond and the linkage between Israel and the United States go beyond the political and solidarity views, but also in the business world. We clearly, as an Israeli company, view a lot of upside and love to invest in the U.S. I mean, we understand the market. There's a rule of law, and it's definitely a market that we want to increase our footprint as well. This is another picture of what you see where our project will be in Brickell. Like I said, we're very bullish on Brickell. We're in Brickell. What we're doing that's a little bit entering the new world of our shopping center. So it's not necessarily grocery anchor shopping center. I mean, we would love to have a Publix on the floor down there. We probably right now in Brickell, where we're looking, the type of investment that we're looking at 2 to 3 floors of retail, probably gym and restaurants, and then residential on top. This property that we bought this property for $30 million, but it has about 438 units capacity, which we're going to build vertically. So those are some of the things that we do. If we jump to this slide, then you can see Toronto. This is an asset that we bought in Toronto. Again, what we're planning to do over here too is probably rebuild it vertically. Again, as I mentioned, most of the things that we've done, it doesn't matter if we're in Toronto or it doesn't matter if we're in Miami, Stockholm, or Warsaw. Basically, it's quite the same framework and the same objective. We buy these flat assets in the very high dense metro cities, and then we're starting to densify them. And by I mean densifying, is start to building vertical and creating more space. One of the key things that we do look that it's important for me to maybe emphasize for you guys as you, for those of you at least interested in real estate, one of the things that we look at the criteria when we buy a shopping center, or we think about, is the demographics. Demographics play a significant role in the asset's potential growth and valuation. So we always look at the 1 mile population growth, and we look at the household income. As you know, we usually what we see is we look at the household income. And for some of these households, what we look to see is if the average household income is about 40 to 60,000, then we're looking for assets that the average household income is about 120,000, 160,000, and also the population usually greater than 100,000 per 3 mile radius. And that's something you only find in those metro cities. Clearly, they're more dense. Clearly, that's where the job growth is. One interesting new matrix that we're starting to look at, and again, this is more catering to the young generation, is what we call the walkability matrix now. And again, I say you guys because I'm above my 40s, but you guys are still, most part, very young. The new generation is like to live in the cities, would use public transportation, to like to walk, to bike. We see that if you go to Stockholm, everybody bikes there, which is quite crazy, you know, because sometimes the temperature there are not really convenient for bicycle, but they prefer in Finland, in Stockholm, they prefer to bike. When I say bike, not on a motorcycle, but actually on a bicycle to go to work. So we're starting to look at also walkability, because a lot of people, and also in Europe, there's the very conscious to the green environment and pollution. So they're starting to more and more become less car-driven economics and more green economics. In fact, and I'm kind of going sideways here, in Europe, their new bonds, I mean, we raise bonds, non-secure bonds, they have what they call a green bond, where a lot of pension and heavy investors will give better interest rate if you raise bonds to create these shopping centers where they're more green, where some of you have solar panels on your roof to save electricity, and they're connected to the metro, so you basically save emissions for the city and so forth. But again, nonetheless, If we jump to Brazil, as I mentioned, you can see that the strategy that I was speaking about, that we're focusing in the heart of the cities, is if you see at the bullseye over here, most of our shopping centers in Brazil, all 8 of them are within 7-mile radius within Faria Lima, which is basically the downtown financial district of Brazil. Again, if you think about São Paulo state, there's 22 million in São Paulo alone. And then from when I talked about the demographics, if we think in terms of demographics, then you can see where's the Brazil average. Brazil average is about 30,000 household income, and our shopping center, where at least we invest, is 73,000, more than double. And you can see in the chart over here that our shopping center are in the higher tier of the household income. In terms of location, I don't want to confuse you. We don't really, the shopping centers that we have there are not the Bal Harbor type of shopping centers, but nonetheless, we want to have that consumer power spending when they go to our shopping center, because that's basically the foundation of your shoppers in your shopping centers who basically consume your for our tenants. Obviously, this picture, I always laugh today when I look at it because this is obviously a pre-COVID picture in Brazil. You can see basically this is our shopping center right here. We have in this shopping center about 1.5 million people passing by every day in the shopping center. So again, to kind of echo what I keep saying, these are some of our main things when we focus about shopping centers. We look for high traffic, high income power purchase to make sure that our revenues keep growing. In Europe, just to give you a bit of summary of Europe, and then I'll go a little bit on the financial side, and then we can open for Q&A. In Europe, you can see the transformation that we created in the shopping centers. And again, this is really to address the e-commerce and the Amazon of the world. We had, if we look at the Central and Eastern Europe, we had in 2014, 153 shopping centers, and today we only have 31. We divested a lot of these shopping centers that were not really could handle a lot of the threat of Amazon. But on the other hand, if you look, what we have fewer assets, but we almost doubled, more than quadrupled the asset value that we have. So we have 31 shopping centers, but the average shopping center is 82 million euro compared to 153 shopping centers at 17 million euro average per asset valuation. So they're saying is we're not really focused on the quantity, but rather the quality, and that is again kind of fitting with moving into the city. I will this is an asset that you see here in Warsaw, and again, as I mentioned, there's a bus stations over here, and as I mentioned before, if you look at the density, we like to be in the heart of the cities. This is where the attraction, this is where people are drawn to, this is the office building, people work, and they usually consume and spend the money or use their shopping. If I'll jump a little bit on financing side because I covered a little bit around the world what we do and who we are, but it's important to understand that at the end of the day, we are an Israeli company, and like I said, all of our funding, all our capital at the end of the day, I mean, 95% of our investors are Israeli-based investors. They're the big pension funds, so all the teachers' pension fund in Israel, or the federal utility company in Israel, they put their money in those pension funds. We raise it via bonds, via equity, and then we basically invest in real estate, and then we basically give dividends back to these investors. So at the end of the day, what we have, we're sitting today about $2.4 billion US needs of liquidity. We have about 1.8 billion debt to pay over the next 3 years. So in terms of COVID, obviously it has an impact of the shopping centers. I mean, we felt at least in Miami and some areas in the US, there was not really a closure But states like Israel went back and forth a few times. They were in closure. During COVID, I had to relocate it to Israel for 4 months to be on the ground there. So things, when I came back to Miami, there was quite a difference in the way of each country treated the COVID. Again, not to say which one was better or worse, but the idea is at the end of the day, Israel has been very pioneered in the vaccination. Today, about 60% of the people over there are vaccinated. And what it means, and again, first of all, it's good in terms of the health aspect, but from a business market and economics, today Israel is completely wide open for business. So all of our shopping centers are open over there, as they are in the U.S. Today, Brazil is still closed. They're going to reopen on Friday. Warsaw and Poland and Czech, they're still closed. They're going to open probably in May. These are some of the things we really, I think, at the end of the day, when we think about Israel, the investors and the country, is some of the things that are very unique to Israel. And being such a small country, at the end of the day, we are, as Israeli company, able to raise a lot of liquidity from this country and being able to provide the Israeli investor a lot of exposure around the world and in terms of the real estate, in terms of the real estate aspect of things. This is more financial stuff. I'll just go over it briefly. We obviously raised, as I said, most of our bonds. We have about $7.5 billion bonds in Israel of our Israeli investors. They're all listed in Bloomberg, but nonetheless, this is our bond payments. We generate about $1.3 billion of net operating income every year, and we're pretty much have a very nice staggered maturity schedule so we can serve our debt. Clearly, every year we raised about another $1 billion, and we grow and we grow and we grow. This company started with $200 million investment, and today we have about $11 billion US balance sheet. So we believe again that the main threat of our business is not so much the COVID. COVID was a very violent disruption to the market, and obviously had some, unfortunately, it's a pandemic that caused a lot of life. But in terms of going back to business, we believe we're at the start of the beginning, start of the end of this pandemic, and hopefully the vaccination will continue to roll out faster as they've done in Israel and now in Florida. And I believe in Q2 of 21, we're going to start seeing things kind of somewhat going back to normal. So this is kind of sum up of the presentation. I will open up for Q&A. I mean, anything you would like to ask, I'll be more than happy. I think on a personal level, it's been quite an interesting, being Israeli, born and raised in Israel, now residing in the U.S., to travel all these places, doing business across the world. There's a lot of variation. I think for as an Israeli person, I think that some of the qualities of Israelis being very direct is helpful, and sometimes we gotta be understanding. And when you do business, the way we speak, the way I speak in the U.S. is different. The way I handle the people in Brazil and Israel, I transform back to being Israeli, and so it's more of a little bit arguing and stuff like that. But at the end, we're very proud to be an Israeli company with a global presence. I think that is what we're not doing. We're not dealing with the high-tech industry, but I think we're the largest real estate global company that came out of Israel. So that's what I have. And John, I'll let you guys go to Q&A.
Yeah, we have a bunch of questions and about 15 minutes or so. So we're going to try to get through as many as we can here. There were a few about COVID and what the world looks like post-COVID. So I'm going to kind of combine them. You mentioned gyms being an anchor. I mean, do you see that being the case in a post-COVID world? And just overall, what does it look like? What do you think the market looks like after your market?
I think gyms will come back, and again, it's very interesting when you go from region to region. So if we go to Sweden tomorrow, then you see the gyms are open. but there's also variations, you know. I mean, here, LA Fitness, and we know that LA Fitness is open for business. On the other hand, right now, all the gyms in Brazil are closed. Israel, I think, is actually a very good indication of what will happen around the world. And the reason I'm saying, because Israel is the number one in terms of advancing the COVID vaccination, 60% of its population now vaccinated. So you're kind of starting to see what the new normal will be. So if you walk to a gym today in Israel, then what they have is a system where they call the green tag. So you basically, in order to walk into the gym and work out, you're going to have to show that you're fully vaccinated. There's more, obviously, the hygiene and the sanitation. I mean, if you go to a yoga class, if it used to be 25 people, now it's probably going to be only on small capsules of 10 people. Clearly, things like Peloton and others and doing workout outside will probably increase. I mean, I saw that in Israel, and we see it here in Miami. But remember, these are not a good example because the weather in these regions, if you look at Miami and Israel, Tel Aviv is pretty much very similar in terms of the annual weather atmosphere. But when you think about Europe, where you think about Toronto, where you think about north of the U.S., you don't have 70 Fahrenheit all year long. So it's hard to work out outside. So I think the gyms will come back, but there will be a little bit smaller classes, more limitation. And it will be very linear. If I had to do two parallel graphs, the opening of the gym will be very correlative to the level of vaccination. But again, I think everything in the health conscious is here to stay. I mean, if it's Whole Foods, if it's all I think when there was a company, SmartFit, the local gyms in Brazil, they exploded over there because the world is becoming more health conscious. And I think at the end of the day, COVID, ironically, will also help that because it's again, if you read, and again, I'm not a doctor, to protect your immune system, it all has to do with what you eat and how you exercise. So yes, clearly, look, in 1980s or 1985, having a gym in a shopping center was a disaster. They're poor credit. They used to have a lot of overruns. I mean, gym owners would switch all the time. But today, it's definitely one of the anchors in the shopping center. And I think COVID will not change that use permanently. It's just going to slow it down. But I think it will come back up as vaccination will roll up more than what they are today.
Along the same lines, you had talked about public transportation. Some of the buildings have the public transportation right in them. That's a popular thing. Two-part question: how do you manage working with transit authorities on that sort of thing? And then also, as far as COVID goes, what is the future of public transportation moving forward?
Yeah, so I'll answer the first question, then I'll answer the second. The first question is, everything we do when we design, when you saw a lot of the vertical investments, and when we're building high, we have a lot of air rights. So we're using those air rights and we start building, where residential, where there's offices above our shopping centers. Everything is done with 100% fully coordination with the city, with the municipality, with the urban planning subsection of those cities. Urban planning, for those of you who study that's going to be, I think, a huge thing in the future, just because the population growth and the urbanization. Everybody wants to be in the cities. And now it's kind of, again, COVID impacted that too, because there's been a lot of work from home. So people starting to get back outside the cities because it's less expensive. But I think that trend also is just a point in time. So everything that we do, when you need to get when you want to build vertical, a 40-story, 60-story building, you usually start working with the cities. And part of that segment, as you work towards the permits, is working with the transportation authorities, making sure, that you have those train stations stopping there, that there's actually a bus station terminals and access to alleviate some of the congestion that can create it if we don't plan it correctly. There's no point to build a 60-story building if you cannot provide those tenants a good access to that building. It's just not going to work. It's not just the economics and the Excel sheet and the numbers. It's no different than, if you look some buildings in Brickell, just as a metaphor, you don't want to live in the 60th floor and have 2 elevators in the building. You're gonna hate that day every day that you're gonna walk in. But you much rather be on the 40th floor but have 6 elevators in your building. That is very metaphoric. The access and the ingress. It's not just having the public transportation. It's also which side of the road you're gonna have them. And another metaphor, when we build the shopping centers, we don't really just, when we look at the location, we also look at the side of the traffic that people go back on the way back from home, because that's what the statistics show, that most people buy the groceries on the way back from home, or when they have to stop running their errands, is the way back from home. I don't know a lot of people that could be that go buy grocery do their groceries at 7 a.m. on the way to work. I mean, it doesn't kind of make sense, because you're not going to keep it in the car. I mean, think about Miami. You're not going to buy your milk on your way to work. It's probably going to be bad in 20 seconds. So we think there's a lot of thinking behind. You don't see it in the numbers. You don't see it in the pictures, but there's a lot. It's a world within itself. So that is very interesting. And remind me, the second question was about public transportation, about the COVID.
Yeah.
I think last week, I read in the Wall Street Journal that the New York Metro, for the first time this year, or since COVID hit, 2 million passengers in the Metro. Again, can I say, oh, wow, that's going to be back? No, you can see what's happening in New York. People gradually and slowly moving back into the city. I mean, it's quite remarkable driving in Miami right now and seeing so many New York license plates over here. But again, I think it's also a point in time. I think, as I mentioned with the answer to the gyms, high correlation to the level of vaccination. The more and more vaccination is going to be the rollout, the more and more people will be more comfortable to go back to this public transportation and use of airlines and so forth. So I'm very hopeful, not for the sake of the business, but for the sake of the health of the country, is that those vaccinations go around faster, and that will really open up we're going to go back to business. So, and look, there's also a huge difference riding a subway in New York than riding a subway in Stockholm. It's a complete difference. I mean, the density, the etiquette. I mean, it's completely different. So, but if in Stockholm, a lot of the transportation is open. People are more well aware. People are more conscious. People, sorry to say that, are a little bit more concerned about the other people next to them. So, the extreme example is Japan. If you go to Japan, and you can see how there's no trash can in the streets. So it also depends on the culture. But I think, to answer that question in one sentence, I say the transportation, I think, will resume to its normalcy once the COVID numbers will be at the 80-90% rollout.
Sounds good. All right, we have about 8 minutes left and a bunch of questions, so let's kind of like rapid fire.
Okay, I'll try to be short.
There's a question about Israel, and then a separate question about other countries, politics-wise. Obviously Israel signed some peace treaties recently and has a good relationship with the U.S. How important is the country's relationships around the world to your business?
It's important. Unfortunately, it's important. And I'm saying unfortunately because you can see that in Europe, it's not a coincidence that we are working under different names. We work in Europe, we own 26 shopping centers in one region and another 30 shopping centers in a different region. We don't really use the word Gazit. We unfortunately, as proud as we are being an Israeli company, we don't hang the flag of Israel in our shopping centers in Europe. It's a way sad as being Israeli and feeling very strong about my Israeli identity. But at the end of the day, one of the things, the flip side is when you do business around the world, we have a lot of tenants, all kinds of races, backgrounds. At the end of the day, all the people are the same. Everybody wants to make a living. Everybody wants to do business. Everybody wants to take care of the family. Clearly, the relationship and the politics has a play in it, but we try when we do business to put politics aside. We obviously focus only on the business. Look, unfortunately, Israel is what happened in Israel is that just became a powerhouse in the Middle East, not just militarily wise, but economically. If you look at the neighboring countries, they were not able to reach the same height as Israel. And as you all know, Israel has no natural resources. It's all human intellectual. And one of the things that I'm very happy about is and I give you an example, when Israel and Dubai signed the peace agreement, the next day I had 4 Zoom meetings with investors from Dubai that want to do business. And it was such a good meeting. It wasn't even, there's no tense, it was like almost a relief that we unfortunately were not able to do business, not because we didn't want to, not because we couldn't do and do a lot of very nice things together. It's because the mandates of the countries. So I'm very hopeful in that regard. But again, I mean, when it comes to businesses, again, people are people, and we very much like to operate in those territories and meet new people and learn about them.
And then I guess on the flip side is, in countries like Brazil and other places, when, if there's, turmoil politically, does that affect, where you do business? Does what's going on in other countries affect, your decisions?
That's a great question, and that clearly it is. Whoever studied finance knows that the higher the risk, the higher return. It's no coincidence that Brazil is only 15% of our balance sheet. The reason why is because the investor appetite for more risk is low. So we have a lot of things that we look when we do business: rule of law, stability, and ease of doing business. Brazil is clearly, you can see that is still an emerging market by definition. I mean, you have even China, Brazil, India, Russia. But if we compare Russia to Brazil, and again, I'm talking strictly from a business standpoint, we have 4% exposure to Russia. We have 15% exposure to Brazil. In Russia, our biggest fear that if we buy a shopping center, then tomorrow the government can take over the shopping centers with no regards to the rule of law. So the political stability, the ease of rule of law is things that we consider. On the other hand, there's no coincidence that in Brazil our returns were double digits, where in Israel they're single digits. So the higher risk, the higher return works over here as well. But again, in the entire portfolio, we have some exposure to those areas, but we minimize them they're not going to become majority, even though the yields and the return is higher.
We're nearing our time limit here. So the important question for all the students here is, starting out their careers, they're looking for some advice. How does someone become the next CFO of Gazette Globe? What does that path look like?
Wow. So, look, John knows me for a long time. I personally came to the country with $800 and a backpack. I think the formula is very, very simple. It's just a lot of hard work, and determination. I think you guys are in a great place. You're already in college, so that's a good start. But every phase of your career, it's like basically you have to have that determination, because you got to put all the hard work in college. And once you're done with college, you get your first job. Everything you've done up to that point, you start from zero. You get your first job. You got to work hard, try to be the best you can be. And after 3 years, you hit a ceiling, and you either go to another job or you keep progress. And then everything you got to that point is kind of erased. Even today, I can tell you, as being a CFO of a global company, it doesn't get easier. Not in terms of continue to proving myself, but the work hours, it just gets harder because of the responsibility. So I would say just determination and hard working. This is the beauty of the United States. So I think you guys already it's starting that. So that keep in mind. The other thing, of course, is interpersonal skills is very important, and be open-minded, creative, and dynamic. But at the end of the day, I think it all comes down to really hard work and determination. At least that worked for me. So.
And I think there's a lesson, from your career as well, that, you don't have to just think of all the jobs that are around you. I mean, you live in Miami and you said you work 2 weeks a month in Israel. I mean, I don't know if you're the only person in the world doing that sort of thing, but the knowing that you can work anywhere in the world these days. I mean, what's that experience like, traveling?
Oh, this is a global world. I mean, I know. Again, pre-COVID, I knew the people at the gate in the Miami airport and Stockholm airport and Brazil's Guarulhos airport better than I know the people here in Miami in the coffee shops. And the reason why, because like I said, I do about 50 to 60 hours of plane travel. Unfortunately, look, I would love to be in Miami all month. I mean, this is the great place. I mean, the sun and the beach is great, but unfortunately, I get like only a weekend and a half in Miami, barely. But this is a global world. Like I said, you have to be dynamic. You have to understand other cultures. You have to be respectful of other cultures. I think it's great. Look, traveling sounds very glorious, but it gets hard. It's there's, like I said, not just. You just don't have to deal with different cultures and different aspects of business etiquette, but also the actual logistics of it, flying at night and the time difference and all so forth. I one of the things I really like is to go work out different places around the world. When I go to Sweden, all the workouts there are kind of geared toward people that ski. So you see people in the gym just do the squats and do all these crazy leg lifting and if you go to Israel gym, it is quite a scene. It's a comical scene. People talk on the phone and eating bureka while they're working out. So I mean, it's the thing is, globalization is here. Look, where are today? Who would have thought that today I'll give a presentation to 70, 90 people through a computer? I usually do the investor presentation and roadshow in front of people in different places around the world. So the world is dynamic. The world has changed. You have to be global. Always educate yourself, and that's the key. And enjoy it. I mean, I really enjoy it. The aspect of meeting these new people. I like, again, this Sunday I got to fly to Brazil. I have a team there that I haven't seen in person quite a long time, so I'm actually excited to see them. It's been quite a journey, and it's a great one. So as long as you kind of open-minded about certain things, so.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to turn it over to Sam to wrap it up for us.
Great. Thank you.
Awesome. And thank you again to all of our co-sponsors, the FIU College of Business, Hollo School of Real Estate, and RISA. We also invite everyone to join us tonight for our last event. And we're celebrating Israel's Independence Day in a unique way. It's an interactive session about the Dead Sea Revival Project at 6:30. And the registration details and info about the entire week's events, they're going to be found in a link posted in the chat. And we really want to thank Adi for his time today, and everyone for showing up again. And have a great rest of your day.